Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to session 2, SEL Techniques and Tools for Adults and Students, the Foundation for Successful Learning, Remote or in Person. Did just want to remind everybody of the orientation to Zoom. We ask that you use the Q&A function to submit questions to our presenters and use the chat function to speak with each other and to share resources. I did want to highlight, we do have 2 ASL interpreters with us. We had a little bit of a challenge in session 1, but I think it's been corrected for session 2, but you all can let us know. You should have an option to switch to gallery view, so that you can see both the person speaking as well as the interpreter and the other presenters. So if you all want to try that, check that out, and then let us know in the chat box if you're able to do that. And if there are any additional problems, please let us know. I'm just gonna look at the chat real quick. Okay, it looks like it's working. It says side by side. So it looks like side by side or gallery view should make it work. Okay, great. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to briefly introduce our presenters. Their full bios are available on the conference webpage. But we have with us today Liz Warner. She's the co-founder and co-director with also co-presenter Patricia Heindel of the School Culture and Climate Initiative based at the Center for Human and Social Development at St. Elizabeth University. Liz has been at the forefront of creating supports and resources for schools, and she's the president of SEL for NJ, which is the state affiliate for SEL for US. We also have Erica Brentan, who's also with the School Culture and Climate Initiative. She's an educational consultant with expertise in instructional practice and behavior management. She worked for 15 years as a teacher, coach, and professional development specialist at a range of schools in New York City, and has developed a unique perspective on how every school can reach its full potential. And then we also have Dr. Patricia, she goes by Trish Heindel. She's a professor of psychology and the dean of the School of Professional Studies at St. Elizabeth University. She's the director of the SEU Center for Human and Social Development and also the co-director with Liz for the Center's School Culture and Climate Initiative. In addition, she and Dr. Maurice Elias, professor of psychology at Rutgers, are co-directors of the Academy for Social Emotional Learning in Schools, an online professional learning community and certificate program in social emotional learning and character development. They have many years of really wonderful experience to bring to bear on the current circumstance, and we're very happy to have them with us here today. So with that, I believe I'm turning it over to Liz.
Yes, thank you, Anne, and welcome everyone, and good morning. And I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Erica, to get us started, and then we're going to come back and say a few words about what we do and what we're going to be doing today.
Okay, so if we could advance the slide forward, thank you. So we're going to do a grounding activity right now to get us really present in this moment. So what I'm going to ask is if everybody could be seated in a mindful posture so that you have free airways, you can feel the ground beneath you. I would say turn off your camera so no one can see you, but we don't have that problem. But just find a seat that feels comfortable. And I invite you to close your eyes. And I invite you to settle into your body a little. Trying to notice the location of your breath. Do you feel your breath maybe in your belly, in your chest, in your nostrils? And just spending a few moments noticing the location of your breath. You may hear some noises around you. Just incorporate those into your breathing. Or maybe you feel some noises of the mind. Just try to let that go. Still noticing where you feel your breath. Let thoughts come and go. And when you're ready, I invite you to feel the weight of your body again. Maybe you feel your back against your seat, your feet on the floor. I invite you to take one full deep breath. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes and return to the screen. Okay, thank you for joining me in that. So to get us started, we're going to do an emotion check-in. So what we're going to ask is that you think about your current mood, or maybe your last current mood, and to just jot down 2 words that describe how you're feeling. You can put them into the chat box. I'm speed reading. Thank you so much, everybody, for your openness. So a lot of various feelings that really span the range of excited, exhausted, calm, but weary. And so amazing that we can all have these mixed feelings inside of us. And this time has really brought up that sense of emotional roller coaster. Trish, did you or Liz want to talk about the one of the CASEL's first tenets of opening with an emotion check-in that might be nice to explain to how we can use this in schools too?
Sure, I will. Welcome, everyone. So sort of the 3 pillars of high quality social emotional learning implementation are always starting a class, a morning meeting or a class lesson or a staff meeting with a grounding activity, like Erica just did with us. Which gives everyone in the room an opportunity to sort of check in with their feelings and their body. And there's a variety of types of activities that you can use, but it just brings people into the moment. You can do the grounding activity before giving students a test, which is often quite helpful, and engage them in a breathing or grounding activity at the same time. So that's part 1 or pillar 1. Then the second is always having as engaging activities as you can in those meetings or classes and lessons. And since we have so many wonderful people on this webinar, we're not going to be able to really model as much as we'd like to have interactive, engaging activities with you all. And then finally, to always have an optimistic closing at the end of a class or at the end of a meeting. An example of an optimistic closing might be to use a gratitude check-in. So asking people to think about something that they are grateful for, which again brings out positive emotions and is calming. And that can be a gratitude that's shared about what another person in the room has done for you, which then shares that positive feeling. So thank you so much. And we often like to demonstrate SEL techniques when we're doing a webinar or a workshop or a presentation. So over to you, Liz.
Great, thank you. And Anne, I think we can move on to the next slide, which is we're thrilled to be here. And we've been working with schools for over 10 years based at the Center for Human and Social Development, as our introduction said. And throughout the 10 years, we've worked with many, many schools in many different ways, everything from professional development to SEL teacher coaching. We've created networks, professional learning communities to connect schools. We have a school climate lab. And all of these have been in person, and now, of course, they're all virtual. And one of the things that we've learned while working with schools over these years is that every school is different. There's no cookie cutter approach because just as we saw in our opening activity, you know, our own emotions are complicated. We can be feeling different things at the same time that alone look contradictory, but it's true. It's how we feel. Schools are the same, but while working with schools over the course of many years and working with many wonderful mentors and leaders in the field, we have developed a model. And one thing to keep in mind for schools as they're working is that coordination is really key. And if you move to the next model or the next slide, you can see that there's a whole lot of different components that go into creating a school that is thriving. And that's a place where everyone can thrive. And today we're talking about SEL, social emotional learning skills, and we guarantee you'll take away a ton of skills and ideas on how to, create wonderful, safe environments for students. But social emotional skills have a very important relationship with the school climate. It's the social emotional skills of students and staff create the foundation for a positive school climate. And it's within that positive climate that teaching and learning can happen. And they're absolutely interrelated. And likewise, it's important as well as like doing programs. It's important that those are coordinated so that those programs that schools actually achieve the promised outcomes of all those wonderful evidence-based programs, that they have to be implemented with fidelity. So things need to be coordinated, they need to be thoughtfully implemented, and then of course student and staff health. So we're very much, our approach, before we get into the details of the SEL, is just so that you know, is this coordination of supporting schools so that all the wonderful things can work together to ensure that the most impact is received from all that effort. And also I think what is very important is you'll have noticed that in that sharing of the social emotional skills and how the social emotional skills create the climate, it's not just for students. The staff, the adults are incredibly important. And the adults have to be in a good place and have strong social emotional skills in order to, very importantly, they contribute to the climate, of course, but also so that they can model. Modeling is incredibly important. So today we're going to be talking a lot about SEL tips and techniques for classrooms and how to open up, classrooms, whether they're virtual or hybrid or in person. But please keep in mind that everything we're sharing is just as important for the adults and the kids, and the adults need to come first as well. So with that said, I think I'm going to turn it back over to Trish, I believe. Is that right?
That is correct.
All
So
right.
thank you, Liz. So we thought it would be helpful to spend some time at the beginning of this presentation to ground us all in what we are calling social emotional learning, kind of the what and the why of social emotional learning. So what we're going to be doing is sharing a bit of the why first, because there really is a compelling argument for infusing social emotional competency building into schools that we know for decades. But because of the moments that we're in right now, it's even more incredibly important. So we want to be sure we're sort of on the same page with regard to why we're talking about social emotional learning, and then of course what we mean when we use those terms. And then we'll be jumping into some practical tips and techniques and tools for what educators can be doing, you all can be doing with your students during the reopening. And there are a lot of resources that have been published by various organizations and groups, including SEL4US, on reopening schools through an SEL lens. So very powerful argument for really intentionally and systemically infusing social emotional learning into schools now more than ever. So Anne, if you go to the next slide, social emotional learning in some educators' minds when it was first being discussed was thought of or perceived as being the next flavor of the month, that it was another fad that would come and would go. But the research around what gains you see when you intentionally infuse high quality social emotional learning into the school experience for students and adults, the benefits are just enormous. So in 2011, before I talk about what's on this slide, in 2011, there was the first meta-analysis study that was published by Durlak and colleagues, and it's in the Journal Child Development. And it was a meta-analysis that combined the outcomes of couple of hundred well-controlled clinical studies of what you gain in students who have had a high-quality social emotional learning program delivered in their classrooms. And that study showed the gains that the students at the end of 2 years were not only social emotional gains. So the one important learning was that social emotional skills can be taught and can improve with a high quality, intentional, systemic focus on helping students to improve those competencies. So the first important finding was that there was significant gains in measured social emotional competence. So it does work. There was also tremendous gains in terms of the social emotional well-being of students. So there was increased attitudes, positive attitudes about self, decreased aggressive behavior, decreased emotional disturbance, and more positive social behaviors. But the most surprising outcome was the impact on academic performance. So the students who had the high quality social emotional learning programming scored upwards of 11 percentile points higher on standardized academic tests than students in control classrooms who did not have the social emotional programming. And some of the studies in the meta-analysis showed upwards of 17 percentile point gains over the control students. So that was a really eye-opener to see the impact that social emotional competence has on students' ability to learn as measured by standardized tests. So it was a very compelling study and report. But the questions then were, well, will it stick? And so this slide, which is kind of very complicated and busy, is from an organization called CASEL. Many of you might be familiar with CASEL. If not, it stands for the Collaborative for Academic and Social Learning. And the website is on this slide, CASEL.org. CASEL is a national organization that is well-resourced, that is a clearinghouse for all things SEL in terms of research. They have vetted social-emotional programs, and you can look at those. They have information on social-emotional learning standards that various states have adopted. So it's a wonderful resource or site to go to. But this slide from CASEL organizes data from longitudinal work that has shown that the impact of those social emotional learning programs on students have long-term sustained impact. So you can see on this slide the number of different programs that were reviewed in this meta-analysis that was published in 2017, and the number of students in the study, and the length of time of these longitudinal studies range from 6 months to 18 months. And the students that showed those social emotional gains at baseline also continued to show those gains when compared to, again, control students of the same age who had not had that social emotional learning experience. What's incredibly important is the last paragraph on the bottom right. The long-term sustained benefits shown in this study were the same regardless of socioeconomic background, students' race or school location, urban, suburban, rural. So the impact on all different kinds of students and classrooms and schools is striking. And you see with the improvements continued in academic performance. You see that the decline in the negative behaviors continued. Is really, really strong and powerful data. In addition, there have been other studies showing that students who have social emotional learning end up having better graduation rates, both high school graduation and post-secondary, decreased criminal activity, decreases in teen pregnancy, decreases in mental health disorders. We can also be talking about workforce readiness, and the workforce readiness skills that employers are looking for are mostly in these sort of soft skill areas that we're going to be defining in a second. Things like the ability to manage stress, skills in people management, teamwork skills. All of these are in this broad umbrella of social emotional competence. But Anne, if you go to the next slide, what's also important to point out is that social emotional competence benefits adults as well. So there's been research, this one is from 2009, that showed teachers who possess stronger social emotional competencies are more likely to stay in the classroom longer. So, I mean, I think we're all familiar with the turnover rates in teachers, and particularly in new teachers in their first year. So again, helping adults to build social emotional competence, particularly teachers building those competencies, are going to lead to them being more successful as educators and more satisfied in their work. And why is it that social emotional skills in teachers has this benefit? It's because of all of those listed bullets below. Teachers with high levels of social emotional competence are able to better develop and manage nurturing relationships with their students, manage behavior. They're serving as really good behavioral role models for their children. So if their children are modeling their good behavior, then children are more behaved in the classroom. They're better at regulating their own emotions. And they can create a positive climate in the classroom where it's calm, where students feel safe, where students feel connected and a sense of belonging. And in 2017, which sounds like such a long time ago, and you know, when we think back, we think, wow, it was certainly calmer in 2017 than it is now. There was a workforce quality study of educators done. And in 2017, educators who responded to a survey about the quality of their work life, 58% of the teachers who responded said their mental health was, quote, not good. 58%. That's 2 times the rate of the general workforce. And that was in 2017. So it's incredibly important now to think about how we can support adults in schools, teachers, staff, school leaders, to focus on building those social emotional competencies inside themselves so that they can then turn and help to build those social emotional competencies in their students. So next slide, please, Anne. So what are we talking about when we're using the term social emotional learning? It is an umbrella term these days. There are a lot of words, a veritable word salad of terms that are under this broad umbrella. You've heard of growth mindset. You've heard of mindfulness, positive development, positive coping skills. All of these sort of soft skills, emotional intelligence, are being used today, and it's creating a bit of confusion. So what we like to have you think about is when you are implementing any kind of initiative in a school, it's very important to have a common language and to have a shared vocabulary and a shared understanding so that you're all on the same foundation. So what we find helpful, and you may have seen this wheel before, you may not have, this is one model for how to think about what we mean when we're saying social emotional learning. Again, it's from CASEL, and it's a model that is frequently used by people who are infusing and thinking about implementing social emotional learning into schools/districts. So the CASEL model defines social emotional learning as an umbrella set of 5 competencies. And so you see those competencies in the center of this wheel. The 2 that are in orange are the foundational social emotional competencies that are sort of intrapersonal, and those are self-awareness and self-management. And you see in the bulleted boxes an unpacking of what we're talking about when we're talking about these 2 fundamental intrapersonal skills. And these are skills, again, to just remind us all that these are skills that can be improved, that can develop. It's not that we're born either with competencies in this domain or not. It's not about our personality. It's about really developing and strengthening skills. So self-awareness is the ability to identify your emotions, to recognize your strengths, which is a source of self-confidence and goal setting. Self-management is the ability to manage those emotions, those feelings that we started out checking in on. And then in the green are interpersonal skills, social awareness, relationship skills. So you can see that self-awareness and self-management are fundamental to developing and improving your skills in those other green domains. So it's important to know oneself and manage oneself in relationship to others. So social awareness is the ability to take the perspective of others, to be empathetic, for example, and relationship skills are fundamentally reliant on our ability to have that kind of awareness of others. And then responsible decision making, the ability to resolve problems, identify problems, define problems, reflect, and to act in ways that is ethically and socially responsible. So the outer rings, I'm not going to really talk about, but the purpose of having those outer rings is to communicate that it's really critical that social emotional, the addressing of social emotional skills and competencies happens not just in the classroom, but school-wide. Not just in school, but you want to engage families in an understanding and focus of helping children develop these and improve these skills. So we don't want social emotional learning to be something that happens 1 hour a week on a Friday morning. It's something that has to be in the vision and mission statements of the school and district. It has to be something that's reflected in the policies of the school. It has to connect with families so that kids are getting the opportunity to practice these skills. And it becomes a part of their experience from the morning until the end of their day. Next slide, please, Anne. So why is SEL critical in this moment? When you think about those skills that we just talked about and connect it to 2020 and the spring that we've had and the next year that we're going into, all of these challenges on this slide are going to be better addressed and dealt with if we have a good foundation of those social emotional skills. So there are students and adults who have experienced trauma prior to the COVID pandemic and prior to the heightened focus and spotlight on systemic racism and the heightened focus on the inequities in terms of health and how different communities have been hit harder by the pandemic than others, communities of color. So all of that trauma has compounded in the trauma experience that some of our students have had, adverse childhood experiences that they have had or they're living through. But there's kind of like this generalized trauma experience that we're all sharing as a community. There's a need to be talking about race and racism. How do we do that in a culturally competent way? Self-care and coping, building relationships from a distance. Educators and staff and counselors and school psychologists had to quickly figure out how to do that in March. How do you keep a tab on the most vulnerable students when they're not with you in the classroom? How do you build relationships with families who are now being asked to be teachers as well as parenting? And so on, and engaging students in learning from a distance, engaging family in that learning. And now potentially being prepared, students and adults, to be in different learning environments at different moments in time. So it's really a very critical time. That's challenging our resilience, that's challenging our social emotional well-being, and challenging us to really think about how we can build more competence in students, children, and in our students. So we go to the next slide, Anne. Just really quickly, another sort of version of social emotional learning is social emotional learning through an equity lens. And CASEL has updated those definitions of the 5 competencies that I talked about earlier to incorporate how each of these social emotional competencies connect to cultural competence, connect to thinking about equity, connect to thinking about systemic racism. And here you see the expanded descriptions of each of these that connects these common 4 competencies to what we really recognize we need so much today. So self-awareness is absolutely critical. In particular, I will point out to examining our implicit biases. Self-management, coping with grief and loss, as we just talked about, the trauma that's been experienced by communities and personally. Social awareness, being aware, trying to understand more deeply the inequities that we have in our society and the impact of those inequities, trying to become more aware of the privilege that we might have in that bucket of self-awareness and be aware of the experience of others who do not have common experiences and have less privilege, other privilege. Building meaningful connections and relationships across different cultures and age, so critically important for educators who want to get to know their students, to be really very much self-aware of potential biases and implicit ideas about our students. And then responsible decision making. What can we all do individually and collectively to increase the well-being of our whole society and engage in creating a more equitable society? So that is, just very quickly, some background to sort of foundation to give us all the same language and speak. So I'm going to turn it over now to Erica to talk about tips and techniques. We're not going to be talking about SEL programs. There are a number of high quality SEL programs that are available, curricula that are available, lessons that are available. But what we want to focus on with you are some techniques and tools and tips that can be used and infused quite easily and intentionally without having to purchase or pick a full SEL program. So over to you, Erica.
Okay, thank you, Trish. Okay, if we could advance the slide. So there's a lot of information out there, a lot of resources, and I think, going through it can be a little bit overwhelming, just given that we're all in different places and all schools are doing different things when they return in the fall. So what we did is we really tried to highlight the top 5 recommendations to promote SEL, social emotional learning in the classroom. And then really think about how these 5 recommendations could work in any sort of setting, remote, hybrid, or in person. So I'm just going to run through them real quick, and then we're going to actually ask for a lot of your input and participation as we go through each one. So the first is to provide daily SEL instruction and practice to foster a sense of belonging and safety as students return to close proximity with others or in a virtual setting. The second one is to emphasize school culture and rethink school-wide celebrations and traditions. 3, this would be more of an in-person school environment to make your safety measures visible for students and clearly communicated to families. Number 4, maintain regular communication with families. And 5, as Liz spoke about earlier, is to really make sure that the adult SEL needs are being taken care of and met. So let's go through each one. If we could advance the slide, please. Great, thank you. So what we would like for you to do is, in this first section, the provide daily SEL instruction and practice, we want you to actually jot down in the chat box some ways that you already do this, or you're already planning on doing this for the fall. We think it, given the fact that we have over 500 participants, there's probably a lot of amazing ideas in the virtual room here. So if you could go ahead and jot down some ideas, we would appreciate it. And then as folks are jotting, we can all be reading through them just to get some collective ideas here. A lot of morning meetings and mindfulness, wonderful. You're reading each student by name. Mm-hmm. A lot of check-ins, great. Taking the mood, and a lot of reflection, end of day checkouts. Great. Okay, so folks, definitely feel free to continue to add into the chat and to continue to look through. I think, you know, a lot of the things that you mentioned are the things that we thought, you know, we thought of, and we did research and came to the same conclusion. So it's nice that we're all on the same page. I just wanted to highlight this quote that we put in, which we really believe is sort of the core value of SEL instruction, is that no significant learning occurs without a significant relationship. And so all of these ways that you're indicating that you create daily SEL instruction is really based on building strong relationships. So wonderful. Thank you for your participation.
Yeah, I'm really loving some of these. They're great ideas, singing a morning song, and, you know, thinking about doing these converted to, you know, trying to connect with students who may remain remote is interesting. And I know that educators did wonderful things to adapt quickly in the spring. One tip that I'll just share is, in order to really build positive relationships, we really need to know our students very well. So one tip is to think about, think about and rank your students in order of how well you think you know each one in your class list. And then try to get to know the ones that are not at the top of that list better. But these are fabulous ways of engaging students and making them feel like they're connected and having them be connected.
Great, thank you. Okay, and if we could advance to the next slide. Oh, show and tell on Zoom, I like that too. Okay, so many of these. So here are just some, and these really were, I think a lot were reflective in what you had said too. The daily community building activities like morning meetings, class meetings, games and activities can be done virtually or in person. This was also something that a lot of people had mentioned, to connect with students as a whole, but also in small groups and one-to-one to check in with each other. I just got a responsive classroom note that said one of the best things you can do for students, educators and adults can do for students now is just to let them know that you see them. And so those one-on-one check-ins is a wonderful idea. So also something you had mentioned, frequent opportunities for reflection and feedback to identify needs as students adapt to their new environments. And you also had used this, I saw a lot of ideas about using calming strategies, rest areas to make sure students are supported emotionally. And then we had just put this, consider using SEL instruction through a video-based curriculum, because there's a lot of resources out there that are already developed for you. I know that teachers and school staff, you know, we're working really hard. We're strapped with time sometimes to develop your own SEL curriculum on video can be hard. So there's resources out there for you. Second Step, I know, has free available videos that help students do emotion recognition and just being able to check in with themselves on a daily basis. Also, Move This World, which we got some resources from, has another nice video component to it. So considering using things that are already created is a nice bonus. I'm just curious to look through this chat real quick. Okay. Okay, if we could advance to the next slide, please. Okay, actually, this is the one thing I forgot what I was gonna say. We have made available to you a resource packet, which I'll just be referring to here and there, and I think was put into the chat box. It's on the website. So some of the things that I'm gonna mention are in some of those handouts, which will have some nice resources for you. So this second tenet, emphasize school culture and rethink school-wide celebrations and traditions. In that little handout packet, there's a really nice one-pager that talks about some ways that in this new world we can think about doing this. So if you want to take a look at that, but I also ask if there's anybody who has any ideas for how you either did this in the spring or will be doing this in the upcoming fall, to also put some of these in the chat box. I can give it, oh yeah, okay. I can give an example. One of the ways that my son's school did this is the principal would do morning announcements, virtual morning announcements. And so every morning we would get to see him, and he hosted his own radio show, and students would be able to write in with song requests, and he announced birthdays, and so a wonderful way. But I guess some folks are starting to write in, so let's take a look here. Virtual choir concerts, wonderful. Okay, so I'll give you some time to read over Virtual Student of the Month, wonderful.
Virtual read aloud.
A virtual read aloud. Weekly breakfast with the superintendent.
Virtual graduation. Virtual lunch bunch.
There's another note on the handout that we gave you. Oh, a virtual cooking class and a Zoom dance party. How fun. That talked about asking the students what would be nice for them. I really like that idea. So it's really coming from their perspective and their needs. Okay, wonderful. Thank you, everybody. I'll keep this, keep the chat box open for this, for everybody to continue to add, and please read over that resource when you have the time. If we could also advance to the next slide. Oh, and I like this one. Sorry, my daughter's middle school principal did virtual morning announcements with a riddle to be answered the following day. So it made them look forward to the next day. Okay, so this one is really to be primarily used in an in-person environment to make safety measures visible for students and clearly communicated to families. You know, I think in a lot of social emotional learning programs, the concept of the first 6 weeks is really the crucial time to make any kind of procedures work for the rest of the year. So giving yourself permission to say, we're going to really focus on this in the beginning of school. And we know that there's a palpable sense of anxiety about academic catch up and making sure that students are, you know, getting back into their learning mode from the spring and from the summer, but really taking the time to think about how this could work, setting up safety procedures in a positive way. So thinking about using positive language for each safety measure. So this is how we take care of one another. We're taking care of ourselves and each other. And then the idea of just practicing. So one of the ways that I have found most valuable as both a teacher and a coach and just living in the SEL world is using interactive modeling. So interactive modeling is really the adult showing, not telling students how something is done, but really showing students. So if, let's say, you know, there's a certain way that you want them to walk in the hallway or a certain way you want them to sit, that the teacher always models first, and then the students practice, and then we do it collectively as a class with reflection and feedback. And so my best advice would just really be to think about spending as much time as possible in the very beginning to do this, so that those procedures are really embedded, and then you can work on moving into other kinds of areas and gaining more momentum with academic work. And this is all new for everybody. So being patient and kind to yourselves and for students too. Okay, so if we can move to the next slide. So this is really an area that no matter if it's in a remote setting or an in-person setting, that this time in our lives as educators and as families, that this partnership matters more than ever. And just as a parent of 2 young children who is going through this as both an educator and a parent, I just see that connection being so crucial to everybody's well-being, as I'm sure we all do. So we have 3 bullets here, and then we have some examples on those resources that we gave to you, but I'm just going to read through these, and then we thought that we would also love to hear some of your ideas for ways to make sure that communication is a priority, an utmost priority. So the first one, select a means for communicating with families on a daily, weekly basis. Newsletter, if you look in the resource handout that we gave you, there was like a newsletter there that a teacher had written up that seemed really helpful. Provide support for families to continue to facilitate SEL at home. So again, there's tons of resources out there. CASEL has some lovely, and we'll share the resource guide with you at the end, but CASEL has some really lovely ideas for how parents can facilitate social emotional learning in their own home. And again, a lot of these resources are free. So consider using something that's already created. And then I love this one too, the create weekly challenges or activities to share with families to foster a sense of community school-wide while students are learning from home. And there's a really fun activity in the back of that resource packet that's like a weekly passion project. And so students and families work on it throughout the week and share it with their class or with their school at the end of the week. So I'm gonna just take our attention quickly to the chat box here. And maybe you've already started writing in, but if we could just, if you have any really great ideas that you think the group would benefit from about communication with families, we would love to hear. We'll spend a few moments looking at that. So weekly emails. Great. Virtual parent workshops sound wonderful.
Digital backpack.
Parent university, that's another thing our school district is doing. So really helping parents to understand how to support their children. I'm assuming that's what that is, Julie. Okay, thank you. Very helpful. So I just, as a quick question from Kelly, how do you implement these strategies with families who are overwhelmed as parents, teachers, and working? The daily check-ins or SEL activities would be too difficult. I would just personally say that whatever the needs are of your parent population is what you could provide for them. So I would say only if this is helpful to them, but not something that would add to their stress or take away from their well-being. Or maybe opportunities for them to just share how they're feeling and you know, de-stress? Okay, great. So moving on to the next slide, just checking our timing here. Oh, nope, we're right at the end. Great. So as we said, as Liz mentioned in the beginning, this idea of really taking care of your own social emotional needs, we included an article in the handouts that really explains each one of these bullets, but I'll just read through them quickly. Trimming your list. So really making sure that you're not taking on too much, allowing yourself to stop, giving yourself, time for pause, embracing vulnerability. So I think the more that we can be very open and honest about how we're feeling with our colleagues, with our student, and maybe not our students in a way that's inappropriate, but just the way that we're able to expose our own vulnerability, the more help we'll receive. Reaching out to experts. There's lots of people who are doing lots of amazing work. And again, tons and tons of resources that are available to you. And just this idea that to pass your umbrella, so letting other people care for you just as much as you're caring for others. We just want to make sure that we impress the importance of taking care of the adult self before or simultaneously to taking care of the child. So from here, we have, I think, if we can advance the slide forward once more. Trish or Liz, do you want to take on this slide?
I was
Sure,
waiting.
sorry, I'm trying to see. There we go. Yes, I think, so much has changed the last 6 months, but there's still some fundamental foundational things that have remained the same, which is that we're all humans, and at a foundational level, we need to connect. Relationships are absolutely key, and we have to trust one another. And so the idea of I was noticing the question about how do you reach parents who are overwhelmed? And, at the basic level, we've all been there where there's so many things that are coming at us, we just can't absorb them. So almost just having them be heard, being there, being able to meet them where they are, and likewise with every student, is that just at that foundational level, nothing much happens without a relationship first, and trust. So, and it takes a little while to build. So I think the more we've been talking to schools, it's important to keep in mind that there's so much out there, and if we kind of focus on the basics, then we can build from there. So the idea, we're all educators. The idea is to create school environments where all can thrive. And, we keep on harping on about the adults, but the adults are really, really key. And one of the reasons we've chosen to have the chat going, which will definitely be shared, is that all of you have so many ideas. You're all implementing different things, and schools can learn from one another. And so we're very much in the mindset of being able to facilitate you learning from one another. So I expect in this chat, because we've all been speed reading the chat, there's some wonderful, wonderful ideas. And I think that given that we're moving into the question period, I thought it was worthwhile addressing a question that I saw come through about middle school and high school students. A lot of times SEL is considered more an elementary program, which really is absolutely not true, is that those high school kids need social emotional skills more than anyone, because those are the skills they're going to need in order once they get to college, in order to have a successful college university experience. When they get jobs, when they go on to trade school, or whatever path they take. Those social emotional skills are what the grown-up adult world are looking for, and it's what allows them to be successful and to continue to be lifelong learners in whatever field they go into. So and again, with the middle school and high school students, they are different than elementary students, but at the foundational level, they all need to be heard and to feel seen and heard and to be able to use their voice. And so it looks a little bit different, but I think the more chances the students in high school, we see a lot of SEL skills being developed through collaborative work projects as well as through service learning. Opportunities for that kind of, co-creating of projects and working together is a wonderful way of developing social emotional skills. And one thing that I believe that both Eric and Trish touched on, but I think is worth re-emphasizing, is that it's incredibly important to be incredibly transparent and visible and intentional about the social emotional skills. A lot of research as well as a bit of common sense lets us know that, if we're very overt in saying, hey, we're working on self-management of our emotions, when you're upset, what are some things you can do to calm down? That's better than in kind of framing it. It has much more impact than kind of doing it in a top secret manner. So I think it's worth mentioning to be very intentional, to be very transparent about the skills that are being encouraged and practiced. And as Trish mentioned early on, these are skills that are taught and that can be developed and can be learned. And like anything, just like tennis, you have to practice them. So, being very overt, being very transparent and visible about that can make a difference. And all of you are doing so many wonderful things, which is why we're so going to be sharing all of these wonderful ideas that all of you have been sharing.
And there are examples of SEL programs and curricula for middle school and high school, and for high school in particular. Facing History and Ourselves is a really fabulous social emotional curriculum for high school students, delivered through a history social studies lens. So there are programs that are available, and any of these tips and techniques really affect the climate of the relationship between the teacher and the students to students, and that works at any level. So it's really about how we are with each other and what we intentionally are thinking when we're communicating, when we're talking with students about goals and lessons, that we emphasize the impact on these competencies and incorporate the competencies into our learning goals at any level.
So we're going to start the Q&A. We have some questions from our participants. First question is, do you know of any resources that are available in Spanish, and are the resources that you're identifying available in Spanish?
Right. There's some resources that will include, I believe, in the resource pack, but I'm not sure. There are resources available in Spanish. We'll go back and make sure they're in the resource pack. But there is something that's really good for adults and parents. There's been a series of webinars, and they're available for free, that have been created by Pure Edge Inc. They're a foundation, and they do wonderful work. And there's a whole series of adult SEL, adult self-care, the neuroscience of stress, available for educators, and they've just released a whole series for parents. So this kind of addresses some of the comments we've been hearing about how to reach parents. This could be sent through, and if they have the bandwidth to, not, who knows if everyone will be able to access them, but no one can access them if they don't have, access to them, if that makes any sense. They are available in Spanish, which is very helpful. So we'll be sure to include links to those webinars as well.
Okay. Another question is, do you have recommendations for SEL programs for high school? And also, what do you think of the program Character Strong?
I think Trish just mentioned the program for high school. It's, I think, and folks are chatting about it in the chat, the Pure Edge.
Facing History and Ourselves is the one that I mentioned. That's the high school level. Character Strong, I know a little bit about, and I think that has been well received. I myself have not used or incorporated any of their materials.
Okay. And also, can you suggest some good books on COVID for elementary students and or videos?
So if you go on to one resource that is great is if you go on to CASEL, and our last slide of our presentation is a resource list. But if you do go on to CASEL, there's tons of resources about COVID books and videos.
The same with Move This World. If you go to Move This World website, they also have a lot of COVID specific materials that are really great. There's also apertureed.com. I don't know if you're familiar with Aperture. They've been around for a while. Also a lot of really good resources there. Again, COVID related resources in particular. That's apertureed, apertureed.com.
And for all the presenters, we have some questions that have to do with, so one of the questions was, as an Afro-Latino guidance counselor, I've been finding it increasingly hard to help white colleagues, other racial groups as well, become aware of their own privileges and also recognize and sympathize with students from differing backgrounds. It's very frustrating, and in the current international status, I'm seeing a lot of resistance, denial, and anger. Any tips on how to deal with this coming from fellow colleagues?
So yes, thank you for that question. It's, you know, it's an incredibly important question and an incredibly important issue. There are a couple of resources that I would recommend that are books that you might encourage sort of a book reading club, which might open some space for talking about this. One book is Talking About Race, is the title, Talking About Race, and it's written by the author Oluo, O-L-U-O. It's a very accessible, readable book. She does a fabulous job of providing some tips about how to set up those conversations, but also a lot of information that's really good. And then there's also White Fragility, which is a book that's so popular it's even hard to get from Amazon right now. They're back ordered. But White Fragility is a good resource to think and talk about white privilege. I would, you know, suggest
Do you mind if
those.
I jump in? So I also think sometimes having like a third party come in to really support and guide you through this work would be helpful. One resource that I know of, it's a woman, her name is Elena Aguilar. I'll type her name into the chat box. She has a company called The Bright Morning, and they do all work around, you know, bringing school communities together on racial justice and really looking at our biases. And she's a trainer, so, you know, just as maybe a way to support a school community with this, so you don't have to take it all on your own. Oh, Coaching for Equity, right? Someone just put it in. I'll put her website in. And then there's another woman, I'm going to put her in the chat box too. Her name is, just get her name real quick, Dina Simmons. And she really looks at social emotional learning through a racial equity lens. So her work might be also something to consider.
Okay. Another question, would it be possible to try and mention specific strategies to accomplish these things with older students? We are middle school, high school counselors and teachers seem less open to providing this. It appears easier to accomplish with elementary age children.
Right. PJ, that was sort of the question that I was referring to earlier. So I think, collaborative projects, having them, work through, as Trish mentioned, there's a couple of different curriculums out there. But again, it's giving them a chance to practice these skills and being very intentional and very transparent about why these skills are important in their lives and in their future work lives. And why it's helpful for them to manage these skills. So the curriculums that Trish mentioned, and these will be in the resources as well, and we'll put them in the chat, can help do that. But again, the student voice is incredibly important as well. And we've kind of focused on those 5 SEL competencies, but overall student voice and being the idea of, all the kids feeling connected and a sense of friendship and belonging, all of those are very, very important as well.
So I would just also add to the incorporation of collaborative, project-based learning is a good vehicle, but to set collaborative projects up for success by incorporating sort of training for your students about how to be working collaboratively. So what you can be talking about is, social awareness and relationship skills, when really you're talking to them specifically about how kind of the rules of working together as a team. And then reflection, incorporating reflection. And you could do these in a physics class, reflecting at the end of a lesson on what I have learned. Again, is engaging them in that self-awareness skill. So there's ways of intentionally incorporating these skills into the academic content. But I just wanted to add that sort of tip about how to set teams up to be successful by talking with them and setting up rules with them that are really about being socially aware, having good communication and relationship skills, how to resolve interpersonal issues or problems that might arise in the team. You're doing SEL when you're doing that.
So we also have a question, I think you touched on it, but I'm just going to ask it again anyway. How do you implement these strategies with families who are completely overwhelmed as parents, teachers, and working? Many of the families I work with would find the daily check-ins or SEL activities to be too difficult as school's already overwhelming.
I mean, maybe some other folks have other ideas of how to answer this question. I think I think it's sort of meeting the parents' needs where they are, and whatever that a school can do to support the sort of the stress load of a parent is what they can do. But certainly there's no, when we make these recommendations, it's not as a have to, it's more of a, if it's helpful for the families, but nothing that needs to be implemented with fidelity for every family. I think whatever makes the most sense is just the most important thing.
Yeah, the parent check-ins, I think, can help them to sort of express what they're dealing with to you on a regular basis. But then, that puts the onus back on educators to take action, right, to help support them. But yeah, it's a tough question. Families are just absolutely overwhelmed, and making decisions now that they may have to change in a week or two, and just the stress of that uncertainty. But maybe engaging the families doing mindfulness practice or some positive coping skills practice might actually help relieve some stress. But really being aware of what your families are dealing with. I don't have a magic answer.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, one of the things that we've done in our community is just surveying parents. So getting an indication of their stress levels, asking them what they need, and then as a school community, as a PTA, just gathering the resources to say, this one family needs X, this one family needs Y, and what can we do to help them? So there's no magic solution, but we're getting a sense of what the needs are.
Right.
And at the very basic level, creating a connection, you know, so that there's someone from the school who knows how to contact that person, and back, you know, in the opposite direction as well. The parent knows who to contact, so that at least there's a connection, so that schools and the parents can use that when needed, you know, at the very basic level.
So I see that we're coming to the end of our time. We haven't gotten to all the questions, but the presenters have provided their contact information. It will be available for you to ask the questions. And we will also, after the conference, provide a supplemental document with responses and post it to the website. So we appreciate all your questions. We're sorry we didn't get to all of them, but we will answer them later in a supplemental document, or you can reach out to the presenters and ask the questions yourselves.
So we just want to give a final thank you to all our wonderful presenters, Liz Warner, Erica Brentan, and Patricia Heindel. We really appreciate you being with us today. We will create a supplemental document. So you do have contact information, but in an effort to not overwhelm our presenters with email from 500 plus people, you can filter some of those questions through us, and we'll put together a document with the answers pulled together, so that a little bit of an FAQ after the presentation concludes. So thank you again. And for those with us, our next session will begin in 30 minutes at noon. So again, just as a reminder, you'll use a new Zoom link that's available both on our website and through the program. And thank you again to everyone. We appreciate all the wonderful information.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for sharing.